Now this illustration deals with shock protection approach boundaries to exposed energized electrical conductors and circuit parts for AC systems. And these shock boundaries are distances, approach distances, are outlined in Table 130.4 EA. Now, you notice here that the purpose of change was a revision. The revision was made to this table and reflects the requirements for the limited approach boundary as being a shock protection boundary. So basically, you're crossing the arc flash boundary here into this boundary, and when you do, you have to run a shock protection approach boundary distance in accordance with our table you see here, 130.4 EA. And for different voltage levels, you have certain approach distances. Now, notice that it says here that the AFB can be greater from live parts than the limit approach boundary is outlined in 130.5A on page 25. And it's basically the arc flash boundary can be greater in some cases than the limited approach boundary. In fact, the whole room could be an arc flash boundary depending upon the energy level that electrical arc may produce. And we know we can find a lot of this information out in 130.5A and the annex in the back of the 70E document. The main thing they're pointing out in this illustration is shock protection boundaries have to be looked at and that distance determined from this table 130.4 EA on page 25. Now, live parts are being approached. So when you get in that resistant type of boundary there, and you get in that restricted, I should say, boundary, then that approach boundary there, you're approaching the area where shock is perceptive to an individual performing a task. Now, the note just points out again that the arc flash boundary and the limited approach boundary are independent of each other. In other words, I'm going to determine what the say the shock boundary is from this table 130.4 EA for AC and B for DC. But I must calculate the arc flash boundary based upon the calories per centimeter squared from the Annex D. So there are two different boundaries. They are determined differently without we go through the tables for the job risk task categories that we're looking at, such as table 130.5C, table 130.7C15A, as well as the table 130.7C15C. Now, these boundaries have to be determined, and you have the arc flash that you cross, so you determine what the limited approach boundary is. And then, of course, the restricted approach boundary, as we said, you're extending that insulated arm with an insulated tool or gloves to work on the energized electrical component or circuit part only if the plant where you work or facility allows you to work on something energized. Some facilities prohibit energized work, period, or that is an extreme emergency. So kind of check that out carefully before you work on anything that is energized. But this section is dealing with that shock boundary and what section we would use to determine what the shock protection boundary would be for AC or DC systems.